Welcome back, everyone. It looks like was here for the morning advisory group. Good afternoon. Patrick Garay, Bureau Chief for the Bureau of Automotive Repair. This is the first of two regulatory workshops that we have publicly noticed and wanted to get some input on as it relates to, in this case, the first workshop going to be dedicated to some planned updates to the BAR 97 specification, as the name implies, a specification that's been around since 97. So we're almost coming up on 20 years since that specification was first adopted and equipment was certified to that specification, and now has been in use for almost 20 years. Our second workshop will be devoted to some updates that are planned for the much outdated, even though still being implemented, lamp and brake inspection handbooks. And we're going to talk about that with Ed Van Mill, who you saw at the Bar Advisory Group meeting, giving the presentation for that workshop. This is being webcast, and for those who want to participate who aren't necessarily in attendance here today at the building that we're all sitting in the hearing room, you can certainly participate by sending an email to us at barmeeting@dca.ca.gov. Again, that's barmeeting, all one word, at dca.ca.gov. And Tracy will probably be the only one who uses that since she had to leave. But Tracy Renee will definitely be listening, I'm sure. Although she usually texts me, so I'll have to inject her comments through that forum. Way we'll go. We'll proceed with Paul Hedgelin, one of our air quality engineers in the engineering and research branch, giving an overview of the planned changes, and then we'll just kind of open it up for questions or comments or concerns. I will ask that we'll even allow for comments for you to think about it after today. I'm going to ask for a quick turnaround on this one, though. We're kind of under the gun with a short turnaround time because we do need to implement this, as it's all tied into the presentation Clay gave with the Calvista project. And that'll be explained a little bit more maybe in the presentation, or we can get into that as we go along here. But I'll ask for comments a week from tomorrow, so Friday, whatever that is, the 28th. Most of these are very technical in nature. They're aimed at the specification. Obviously, the changes are going to be aimed at some programming-related issues for the equipment manufacturers to upgrade their systems. Very technical in nature, but that does not mean that we don't and are not. That doesn't mean we're not interested in hearing some of kind of the broader overview questions or concerns, or or questions in general about the purpose or intent of the regulation, which I kind of already covered with the need to update these and modernize the equipment. Anyway, I'll turn it over to Paul. And I can't necessarily see, but do you have someone to... Oh, you can do the backwards slide movement. All right. Thank you.
All right. Paul Hedgelin, Bar Engineering Group. So we'll get started with the Bar 97 update regulations. So if you go ahead to slide 2, we're going to talk about changes to the regulation text, followed by changes to the smog check manual with inspection procedures, and finally changes to the Bar 97 specification, which will affect the Bar 97 equipment. So going to slide 3, the first regulation section, California Code of Regulations 3340.17. It's changing to say that the Bar 97 EIS must meet the 2017 version of the Bar 97 specifications. So what that means to stations is that they'll have to acquire a Bar 97 EIS that will be Bar certified to the new spec. And I'll cover some details about what those actual changes are here in a moment. We're looking at January 1st, 2018 for stations having that new equipment as well as having the internet connectivity for that new equipment. Okay, the next slide. There we go. The next regulation section basically is just some cleanup language added to include the OBD inspection system. This current section only talks about the Bar 97 with respect to providing a vehicle inspection report to the customer, protecting the equipment from unauthorized tamper, and not allowing false vehicle or information entry on the machine. So we're just adding new equipment in here to catch up on this one. Okay, in the third regulation section, 3340.45, simply is updated to reference the 2017 version of a smog check manual. So the next few slides, I'll go through the actual changes to the manual affecting the inspection procedure. When these regulations become adopted, we've got a date in here that could be effective on or after July 1st, 2017. Now it will depend on the internet connectivity changes and the certification status for the equipment. How soon to that date, or more likely the January 1st, 2018, we're looking at for requiring the changes. Okay, slide 6, getting into the smog check manual changes. Most of these are just some cleanup stuff that's already in practice, but it's been a policy or kind of accepted to work that way, but it's not actually in print. Nothing that we can communicate for training purposes or hold the stations to doing. So the first one on here is modifying the liquid fuel leak procedure to accommodate hybrids and vehicles that engine shuts off. Well, start-stop vehicle, we call it. So they're allowed to do the liquid leak with the key on to pressurize the fuel system, but the engine not running, which is obviously necessary for that kind of vehicle. Okay, the second bullet here, it just says that we've added the Appendix C to the smog check manual, making it regulation. For quite a while now, it's been on our public website as a guidance document, but not an actual enforceable regulation. And if you recall, this Appendix C document used to be Appendix G, not to try and confuse anyone, but it communicates which aftermarket parts need to have an Air Resources Board executive order or not when you're inspecting them. In the next slide, I'll show a picture of what I'm talking about. So this is just a sample from that table, and if you can see, there's two columns on the right-hand side. One's gasoline vehicles and one's diesel vehicles. And if you've got any question about whether a particular aftermarket part needs an executive order approval or not, you can go down the list and see gasoline vehicles in some cases require it and diesels don't in other cases for the same part. Okay, the next slide, we'll get into a few more smog check manual cleanup type changes. So the first bullet, it just says that a low pressure fuel evaporator test is not required on vehicles with a fuel tank greater than 50 gallons. That's something that we've been doing for a long time. It's just not in print. Second bullet, any station may inspect a gross polluter, but only a star and referee can certify one. We had a question the other day about a station didn't want to inspect a government fleet vehicle and didn't want to worried about a gross polluter thing, but they don't need a certificate issued. So again, a little bit of confusion in that area, so we added that. And the last one here is just saying that dedicated propane and natural gas vehicles over 14,000 gross vehicle weight do not require inspection. Only a couple thousand of these vehicles, 2/3 of them are in fleets, the big fleets like your UPS or FedEx. We'll continue to look at those, and maybe if there is a need to bring them in, we can do that in the future. But for now, they're out, and it actually says so. Okay, and then slide 9. So in the smog check manual, there's a test requirements table, I think on page 2, that says which visual things need to be inspected and whether to use OIS or Bar 97 on certain model year vehicles. At the bottom of that table, there's a footnote. And there was some concern there from industry. It was vague, saying if there's a OBD2 vehicle that's problematic, it may require a Bar 97 inspection. So we tightened this up to say, BAR will tell you if a Bar 97 is required on these vehicles. And in turn, we put these in the OBD reference document. Okay, and that's it for the smog check manual changes. There is one in here, I don't know if I covered. Smog check manual actually says both the bar 97 and the OIS will have to be connected to the central database through an internet connection. Okay, slide 10 is, let me back up one, so I'm up 11, okay. Go ahead, Charlie. There's a microphone.
I'm confused as to why the propane or whatever it is vehicles are exempt. How is it that this program is so important and we've got 2,000 heavy-duty large vehicles? It's very
Sure.
convenient to inspect. Why are we excusing those? That doesn't make sense to me.
They're not compatible with the bar 97 inspection. So a lot of these vehicles were originally diesel-powered vehicles, and they converted them over to dedicated compressed natural gas. So they added spark plugs to the engine, switched the fuel. They won't do a high idle on the two-speed idle test. So we have no way of tweaking the software on the bar 97 to only do a low-speed idle test. So there's no way to test them with the equipment. And we have legislative statute allowing us to exempt certain vehicles that are not compatible with the equipment for the inspection.
You could have something where, you know, you could just manually check it and certify it, whatever. I mean, there's compromises that can be made. It just doesn't make sense to me that this environmental issue is so important that we're, you know, those are very significant, potentially very significantly polluting vehicles that we're just totally ignoring. If there's something that can be done to incorporate them in a reasonable way that's not hard on the Bureau or them, but it's reasonable, so there are some standards. As an example, I found that if you took and put a sniffer in a generator on a motorhome, that you had emissions that were just over the sky, and you could make some minor adjustments, make huge changes in how those things ran, and huge changes in how long it was necessary before you had to decarbonize them and so on. So the question is that appropriate to consider at some point, giving these some sort of an inspection that's reasonable for them and reasonable for the Bureau, and something simple that could be implemented to take a look to make sure that they're not awful. And go to hell is a good answer. That's okay, you know.
Yeah, I understand. It is an air quality concern. I mean, like I said, there's only a couple thousand vehicles, but every vehicle matters as far as air quality.
I think that's true. Yes, I agree.
And we're even looking at maybe in the future we can bring these in and inspect them with an OBD test on the newer equipment. But obviously,
I just can't hardly believe there isn't something reasonable and simple that could be done to verify that it's not awful, like I would get testing the generator on a motorhome, which I found that the emissions were just completely over the sky. And why? I think they set them up that way intentionally, so they need service quickly, you know, whatever. So I can't believe there's not some reasonable, simple methodology to incorporating them where those particular ones get a manually written certificate, whatever. There's got to be some simple way of addressing that if the environment is important in this state, and it seems to be. So just throw it out there for consideration.
Yeah, thank you. All right, so bar 97 specification changes. Here we got it on the slide. So probably the first coming and one of the biggest changes is requiring an internet connection to the vid. So the equipment would be updated. It would use the station's existing internet connection and no longer require the dedicated phone line plugged into the machine to communicate with our central database. We're looking at, we get that worked out with the manufacturers, we could start beta testing for that as early as spring of next year. Other changes in the specification that would end up in the certified equipment would be they have to run an operating system software that's supported, and that means Windows 7 or better. Obviously, the third bullet there, you have to have a computer that runs to be able to run that operating system. Another changes to kind of catch up with technology. We're not requiring a floppy disk drive anymore. We're allowing a USB drive to back up the data. And then the next slide, we're revising some of the screen prompts. They're a little stale in that they say, like a gross polluter vehicle, for example, can only be inspected by a referee or test only. So we're revising that to include STAR. So referee and STAR stations would be the correct station names in that case. The second bullet here, we're putting a reminder on the screen. If I remember right, it's right next to the model year entry, and it's a reminder that the OIS equipment needs to be used on 2000 and newer vehicles that have OBD2 and all the diesel vehicles. Okay, and then going to next slide, 13 on the screen there. It's like 12 on the handouts. We're collecting more data, more gas calibration data, some dynamometer, gas bench manufacturer name, whether acceleration violation limits turned on or off. These three pieces of data will help us track and do analysis on equipment deterioration and failure to know if certain brands we need to pay attention to, or work with the manufacturers to make corrections or improvements to that equipment. So it's really for our more internal auditing and related to equipment certification data collection. And then the last bullet here is a positive, requiring the low pressure data to be communicated to the EIS now instead of through its own phone line. So we'll collect the overall test result from that piece of equipment.
How does that impact your ability to process cases, I guess, in terms of like enforcement or anything?
So currently, there's sort of a broken chain of custody for that data. Right now, it goes from the low pressure device to the equipment manufacturer, and then in turn, it's passed back to BAR. So there's some concern that it's changed hands too many times, and enforcement doesn't care for that. So in this case, it'll be transmitted directly to our database, just like all the other inspection data, to alleviate that concern. Okay, and that's all I have. So with that, we can open it up for questions. Bud?
Do I have to turn this on? Is it on? Okay. Okay, so first off, when I'm on page 5, somehow this got around me because I didn't see the updates for the operating system where it needs to be Windows 7 or higher. So I don't recall that being on the list before. It looks like it's a new requirement that somehow we're talking about now. And the reason why I'm saying that is I've had conversations with our current vendor supplier, and it's SPX, and they were working on a retrofit box that would allow high-speed internet access to our current device that also hooks up to their dyno. And so they were working on a pathway to do this. This requirement here, this new line item, knocks that out. That's no longer possible, I don't think, based on the kind of equipment we have, which would require a different setup entirely. And you know, we've had issues where if it's a dial-up, the protocols are written and configured for one way of communicating. If it's going to be high-speed internet, even if it's going through the box, the protocols for communicating are going to be completely different as well. So this isn't a little thing. This is a big thing. And even if you were to now go, I think somebody was asking earlier today, how many vendors are currently still supporting the equipment that they've got? And most of the current suppliers do. They have to look around for some parts to make this work, no doubt about it, but at least they are standing up and supporting whatever you've got. The new requirements that you're putting in here, I don't think, let's assume there's 4 vendors that currently, so you know, Worldwide, SPX, Bosch, ESP, and somebody else, but the marketplace is dominated by those 3. You're down to 1 right now. I think you're down to 1, and that may be ESP that has a box that might be able to now be introduced to the marketplace that does this. Now you're introducing another vendor to everybody else that has stuff going on? And will that equipment hook up to their dynos that are different between different manufacturers? And how do you make all this stuff work? If you just said we need to have high-speed internet access and it could be retrofitted into current equipment, I think that's a hurdle that guys could get over. At the point where you've now added Windows 7 and it must be compatible with that along with high-speed connection, now that changes the game dramatically. And my sense is that from a regulator's perspective, you go, well, how much are you paying for support now? And if that's $500, well, these guys will sell you a box for $500, so what are you complaining about? It's not as simple as that. Okay, it's not as simple as that. There's more things to consider other than just that. So we're talking about these line items, but a line item is not a line item. A line item forces a number of things to occur. That's my response.
Sure. I have to break that one down. You covered a lot of different things there. So first of all, we were looking at an alternative solution to use a box to convert from dial-up to internet. We found that would require software updates because each manufacturer is different and they use multiple different modems, so there's not a standard to the software. So that trickled down to be a lot of changes, a lot of difficulty. Whereas if we did software update to the machines for the internet connectivity, we came with a standardized protocol for those. It was actually possible. As far as the equipment being compatible with dynamometers and other things, I mean, you are understanding it correctly that this line item, essentially, you would end up with, we know there's 2 manufacturers that have Windows 7 machines right now. There may be another one, maybe not, that would submit for certification next year. But those analyzers are backward compatible, I guess, for lack of a better word, with all the dynamometers. They'll speak to the Maha or the Mustang or even, all those different flavors of dynamometers. Those 2 manufacturers with the new equipment. So, I mean, that does help. It still is a big thing, switching to a whole new analyzer, but it is possible. I think that's it.
Just to follow up on what Bud was talking about, because a lot of our members, it's been a hot topic, really trying to work through all of this, because you're right. I mean, just coming up with a box that's going to be able to go from analog to digital for the high-speed access is already creating a lot of problems because they don't see it working. Then they look at the whole issue of upgrading their systems, and it's a catch-22. And we got this. I'll share just a brief story because I think it's all relative. In one sense, because the equipment and the CPUs are so old, that you really need to upgrade the piece of equipment and get something that's Bar 97 certified, that's a new piece of equipment, that's not going to create all these other problems. That's the upside. The downside is living with the old one, the parts and everything are so antiquated that they're paying a premium to get these things fixed because the parts are so hard and so scarce to find. So you're almost forced into upgrading the Bar 97 to a newer piece of equipment just to avoid that part of it. But some of them are also looking at the shrinking population of cars that are going to be tested in the Bar 97 platform. And they're saying, you know what, I'm just going to test 2000 and newer, period. I'm done. Star program, no other program, don't care. I'm not going to chase this thing forever because the shrinking population. So I think we really have a pretty dynamic business problem in trying to figure out how do we solve it. Because right now, I don't know that we're there yet. And to Bud's point on looking at Windows 7 and newer, I leaned over and when he pointed that out, I said, I don't know too many 286s that will handle Windows 7. So with that, I'll leave it at that. Nina?
So, but if you don't mind my asking, what is the system? Because the rig itself, if I recall correctly, you please check me on this. I think it just requires a supported Windows operating system. I'm not sure that we specify 7 or newer, but it would have to be supported. Does that help mitigate the concern at all, or what system are you using?
Well, Well, on page 5, line 2 says, updates operating system software, Windows 7 or higher.
Yeah, so what Bud's talking about is you've got a number of Snap-on, SPX machines that are running DOS, very old operating system software. Those are no longer going to be certified with this proposed regulation. So then you'd have two other manufacturers, Worldwide and Opus, do have Windows 7 machines, and they've expressed interest in coming in for certification. I don't know if Bosch would or not. They've been in the discussions. They may be interested in coming in and certifying a newer machine with a newer computer to meet this standard. But that's really the effect of this. The shops that don't have a modern platform today would have to get a newer analyzer. And it is required, the STAR smog check manual requires that equipment be in the STAR stations. So those low volume STAR stations would have to consider, you know, is the business worth it or not, right? And we looked at some numbers about, I think it was about a quarter of the STAR stations do one bar 97 test a day. So.
Return on the investment. There's no return on the investment for those stations. If they do one bar 97 test a day, doesn't even pay the interest on the loan for the machine.
Both sides businesses can do less. There's others that are doing more. Well, the other 75% of the STAR stations are doing more than 30 a month.
Yeah.
That's my point.
Yeah.
It's clearly the minority that would be affected, but it's still a fair number of stations, obviously.
Well, I mean, just the mere study of cars on the road today, California always leads the pack on the oldest fleet in the nation. So the average fleet for California is still 12 years or higher in comparison to the rest of the country. So, I mean, there's going to be a higher population of those, but we were all talking going all the way back to the Hamilton lab days when the bar had all the smog check programs centralized under their own deal. And we're like, I don't think we want to go back to that. We just have to figure out a way to solve this because it's a serious problem for the older fleets that are going to remain in the field to get them tested, but to keep people in the game. Because if we look at the number of STAR stations today, and to your point, Paul, you know, if you've got one doing one smog, do you really want to make that investment? It's like, okay, I give up on the STAR program. I really don't want to, but I'm forced in a business decision that if I'm doing such a small volume, then I'm just going to do 2,000 and newer and just be done with it. The concern that we also have, looking at the flip side of that, is if more businesses make that decision, then there's going to be fewer stations doing bar 97 tests, which will drive up the cost to consumers, and then there'll be an outcry from consumers because of how much it costs for them to get a smog test done. So we're kind of trying to wrestle with the whole thing and looking at it from all three sides, your side, the consumer side, and then the business decision. Do I really want to stay in this business?
Yeah, and part of it, the fleet's not disappearing quickly. I mean, we don't have salt on our roads in the state, and they're going to be around. And we have no sunset date for bar 97 testing.
Yeah.
It could go 5, 10 years. I don't know how long. So, I mean, there is a need for newer equipment going forward, and we've always had our hands tied not being able to do software updates for changes. You know, with a platform, with newer certified equipment, and that we can make improvements to the inspection and other issues we have. So.
Was this a happy topic? Boy? Happy.
Look on the bright side, it's been 20 years since we had this talk, though, right? I say it jokingly, but we understand. It's a tough one for us, but it's kind of a necessary step, some of these changes for the move forward with the Calvista project and going internet-based and not supporting the dial-up modems, the modem banks that support the dial-up, and leveling the playing field for that competitive bidding process for the smog check database and communication system, otherwise known as Calviz. I did want to say that, we've thought about, but I can't really, if someone's got some great idea, I mean, we did think about, was there a way that, star stations could just have the option of just having the OIS equipment, but then I think you really put consumers potentially in a bind of trying to find that one star station in their city or their geographic region, close to home or close to work, that has the Bar 97 updated equipment. Might be a tough one. I just don't know how to get there. Anyway, Charlie?
Yes, thank you, Charlie Peters, Clean Air Performance Professionals. I'm this one-note Charlie that keeps thinking there are potentially a lot of cars out there that could and should be tested that are not necessarily happening. And should the Bureau at some point here do some real auditing of what's going on in the fleet and whether or not there are some real opportunities out there for cars that should be a part of smog check that are getting around it by getting a certificate at DMV when they shouldn't, or being in a zip code that shouldn't be, or whatever. Is there? And I suspicion that there are probably literally millions of cars that could and should be in Bar 97 that are not, just due to lack of paying attention to what's really going on here and finding out if in fact we've got some market here. And I would hope that the Bureau of Automotive Repair would be interested in that, because at least there's some certificate and some monies to run the organization, the Department of Consumer Affairs with, if in fact that's valid. And so I would encourage some auditing of what's going on in the fleet and whether or not there are some real opportunities to increase the volume of business in Bar 97. Thank you.
We are working with the Department of Motor Vehicles closely and to identify vehicles that need inspection, that aren't currently getting inspection. So that's partially addresses that.
But if I might interrupt a bit, some of the rumors are that some of that path is through that avenue, so that may not be a totally appropriate audit process.
Anybody on the webcast, Zach? No? Go ahead, David. Do you want your-
Okay, so basically what you're saying is the only even remotely viable option is to use an operating system in a computer as like an upgrade to the existing Bar 97 machines? Or are you saying that because these machines are so old, the only alternative is to just make everybody buy new equipment, the whole new Bar 97 machine that's compatible with the updated software capability?
So it could end up either way. It depends on your equipment manufacturer. So if a manufacturer wanted to bring their current platform in and get recertified, put a new computer and rewrite their software so it's compatible with the Windows 7, for example, that's a possibility. That would put them in compliance with our specification changes. It's more likely it's such an effort to rewrite that software that they would want to submit a whole new machine for certification. So while it is a possibility that they may want to try and certify a unit with a computer in it, I don't see it as real likely. It probably would be a whole new platform.
Unit, whole new platform. Okay.
Are there currently any machines that have passed through certification and are certified gold to go?
We've not done certification testing for these exact changes I mentioned yet, because we need them in regulation and in the spec first before they actually build to it. But we have been working with two manufacturers just recently, and they've come in with a brand-new emissions analyzer, bench we call it, component. And the whole reason for that is just to be able to have new off-the-shelf replacement parts. The current supplier no longer has that particular component available. They rebuild them, they aren't rebuilt properly, there's a lot of turnover, a lot of downtime for the stations. They came to us and said, look, test our current platform with this new piece of equipment in it, just because we want a new supplier that has a reliable piece. So that's probably the biggest part toward the certification, is getting through that gas analyzer testing and getting all that. These other software changes are pretty minor as far as the big picture for certification. So I guess to answer your question, we've already done, we're right in the middle of doing some of the certification testing just for the gas measurement portion of the equipment.
So there was some discussion early on about the state actually owning the programming that went into the machine and the vendors supplying the hardware support side of it. But what was actually in the programming that made the machine run was owned by the state, at which point you guys could make modifications and just download updates right back into the box, and then that would be, you know, a version 2 update on the machines. Is that still in play?
No, that's a completely different thing. That's the new OBD inspection system. The Bar 97 is still the traditional model where the manufacturer writes the software, they load the software into the machine. With the new equipment, you've got the software residing on our central database, and Bar's in control of that software with our contractor, SGS Testcon. So that's where you have the standardized software across all the different platforms. Whereas the Bar 97, we got 4 manufacturers and 6 or 8 flavors of software to deal with. So it's a much larger certification effort.
Charlie Peters, Clean Air Performance Professionals. Back to the old PZEV thing and the new equipment, and you mentioned the new equipment, so I'll take advantage of that. It was that Bar 97 was identifying PZEV vehicles that failed to notify the customer of what was going on. Now you got a comment on the printout, which will, you know, everybody's got a gazillion things in front of them to read constantly, which will have virtually no effect because it's not unique to that car. But the original situation, I felt, was an absolute miracle of getting Bar 97 to actually identify a PZEV that failed. And I didn't think that would ever get pulled off. And as far as I'm concerned, Bureau of Automotive Repair walked on water with that one. They got that one accomplished, which is just completely above and beyond my ideas of possibility. We have not incorporated that in the new equipment. And is that being considered here to put the identifying specifically Bar 97s that fail that we were able to accomplish in Bar, I think I misspoke. Identifying PZEVs that fail that we were doing in Bar 97, are we going to get that incorporated in the new equipment, which I was under the understanding was a simple task in relation to what was accomplished in Bar 97, and is that a part of what's happening?
There's currently no effort to put any advice messaging into the new equipment, like on the Bar 97.
And it's just not important that people get their cars fixed, which are currently not being fixed. That is a huge issue. There's 3 million of those puppies running around, and they're not getting fixed, and I think somebody ought to pay attention to that. I disagree with that being ignored.
So we have a change ticket on hold for that particular thing, and it's a question of resources right now. We've got the Calve project. We have a lot of high priority changes we need to accomplish with the new equipment and with the database. If there's gaps in that schedule and resources, then we can pick back up on some of these on hold tickets that we put in, and it's a possibility. Right now it's not being acted upon.
Does that make me happy? And you know the answer to that is hell no.
Since we're having this discussion, I think it should be mentioned that it appears that the analyzer manufacturers have been fairly responsive to the situation, and to my knowledge, at least a couple of them have developed lease programs, and the lease rates are currently, based on my experiences with it, because of the referee program. If you're currently paying for a service program, warranty service, the lease rates for the new ones are about the same price as what you're currently paying for a service contract. And I believe it includes consumables. The advantage to this is if your market currently has enough Bar 97 testing that it's worth it to you to have an analyzer, but you don't want to make the purchase investment, you can lease the equipment until that such time that the ASM tests in your region are no longer worth owning the thing. So there are other options available now that weren't available up until just recently, that make it, give you other business options.
Yeah, that answers, all the concerns I've heard. It's all about the investment in the equipment. That's really the big problem here.
Yeah, I can't
And
speak
if-
to their programs, their financing programs.
Right, but
I'm
if,
sure they've got them all over the internet.
right, so if they can, lease it for, $500, $600 a month, then it might make sense. Other than that, I mean, the Bar 97 program is probably going to disappear, and you're going to have just a few stations trying to inspect this old fleet, and it's just not going to work. People have to make an appointment for 2 weeks to get their smog check. It's going to cost them $200, and they're driving an old car because they don't have any money anyway. I mean, that's where it's going to deteriorate to, if this issue isn't addressed to make it financially, reasonable for the inspection stations to do the Bar 97s.
So we know a couple of things. One is we've got this dwindling fleet being expected on this. We know that this equipment's aging. Its parts are hard to find. Service costs run in the range of $5,000 a year, I've heard, and maybe even more than that. I don't even know. We know that the program's not going away. We haven't heard anything on the horizon, legislatively speaking, to write us out of this program. We know that it's an important part of the clean air mission still, and the US EPA is not, and California Air Resources Board aren't backing away from this being a component of our program. We also know that to go forward with the new contract and competitively bid it with for the Calvista project, the database and the communication system, they're not going to support the modem banks anymore. So we know we have to go internet. We also have heard the problems with and the costs of having a dedicated phone line. I've heard that since day one of this program. So I don't know what alternatives we have given those things we know. One idea was this retrofit option, as opposed to mandating a Windows 7 or higher operating system. So I don't know what other solutions or thoughts or ideas. But that's kind of what this workshop's about. Is not just this is our first throw out on the board of what we think is the way to go, but doesn't mean it's the only idea out there.
What about outside the box here? Maybe I'm being a little facetious, but I'm just going to throw something out there. What about some sort of state-sponsored program, like a CAPS program for the star stations, to help them financially with the purchase or the lease of the Bar 97 equipment? I mean, I don't know if that requires legislation or, kind of like Obamacare for smog shops. I mean, it sounds crazy, but I'm just going to throw it out there.
Yeah, it needs some legislation, but I think that came up when we were doing Bar 97 too. That same idea. I don't know that we ever got any traction or on that because it's being our law, but I don't see anything in it. But the idea is not a unique one. It has come up before. Not a bad idea, but I think we'd need someone to sponsor that legislation.
And the other thing I think we haven't necessarily addressed that everyone probably knows in the room is that, ESP is requiring that the Gen 1 and Gen 2, they're no longer going to support after a certain time frame.
Right.
That's, just to throw it out there, that is half of the stations own one of those analyzers. So half the stations are already going to be there. They're already going to be moving towards that. And the other piece, I know it was kind of mentioned, but again, just to clarify it, the dynamometers are compatible with the other people that are doing it. So they've actually made it so their controller boards and everything are functioning with those dynamos. So it's about half the cost of what you're probably thinking it is.
On the other side of it is too, most of the stations we're talking about in the program have plenty of volume to go through this change. And it's hard because we do have a dwindling population of vehicles, and so there's always stations on the margin that are going to have their volume fall to a point where they can't necessarily support doing that type of testing anymore. And that is always going to be the case with a program like this. When we have that population is dwindling, and at some point in the future, there's going to be some tipping point where something big has to happen. But what we're looking at right now with this program is we have machines out there that are actually causing some stations a fair amount of downtime, and it's costing them money. We have an option for going forward with new equipment that actually, from what we can tell, as Ed was saying, with consumables and everything that's involved, we can decrease station downtime, we believe, significantly for the stations that are operating, and for a price that's competitive with what they're paying right now for a service contract, and that's with everything all included under the hood. And as far as I understand, not only can you get a monthly contract, but you could get potentially a monthly contract without long-term liability on the contract. And so what we're looking at is for the vast majority of these stations that are operating in this market right now, we believe we have an opportunity here to make things better. And that's really what we're trying to do here. We have an opportunity to improve the equipment, improve the way the industry is able to operate with their equipment, and offer a price that's competitive. And we get around the whole issue of component obsolescence, which is a serious issue right now. We have parts that are going away. We cannot keep these analyzers operational. And so this is a way of dealing with the problem in what we believe is a responsible and an opportunistic way.
Is there any chance we can get the money without doing the test?
Just throwing it out there. Just throwing it out there.
That is out of the box. Right there. Yeah, the check's in the mail.
Well, as long as we're messing things up here, we may as well go ahead and mess it up a little more. Seems to me like when this program started in 1984, the deal was anybody who got in and was going to supply equipment to this program had to put up a means of guaranteeing their participation where if they were to drop out, they had to pay. And that degraded and degraded and degraded, and now they're in total control. And I think that was a pretty good plan where they have to put up a bond or whatever to guarantee their continuing participation rather than leaving everybody hanging in the breeze, that should be included in this system, that they're required to put up bonds to make sure that they're going to be a player and continue to participate, or they're going to pay. And I think that was a good rule when it started, and I was very disappointed to see it go away. I'd like to see it put back in. Thank you.
That definitely messes things up.
And that's not something that's necessarily very expensive. A big company like that could get a bond, get bonded for something like that, a pretty reasonable amount. But that would very definitely assure, once they started participating, the likelihood that they would continue to participate, because nobody will want to pay that off, to pay for having to replace that equipment. So.
The thing is that when we're dealing with manufacturers, and Paul, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the manufacturers at least was proposing a no commitment lease program. You essentially renting the thing on a monthly basis. If the manufacturers are doing that, they've already assumed all the risk. They're going forward with massive development to get this thing underway, assuming that the market's going to be there, not requiring anything long term from the stations to commit. And so they've taken that risk on themselves. Why would we have them go beyond that?
Welcome to the party, but they're interested in putting money in their pocket, and they got it figured out how to get that done, and if they had to put up something indicating they were going to continue or have to pay, I think that would improve the outcome, sir.
But they've taken the risk.
No, I'm sorry.
The webcasters have spoken. They said to speak into the mics. They can't hear us, so, yes. Any other comments? Okay. We'll take comments until, as I said, till close of business a week from tomorrow, the 28th, of October. Send them to Nina's attention. And if you don't have that information, we can get it to you. It's just at the Bureau's headquarters office, and her last name is on, well, spelled on one of the earlier presentations. Yes, Charlie.
Question, point of order is, are verbal comments here count, or does this have to be a written?
No. I'm just, things that come up they might have think of after you have left the meeting today, or anyone else out there listening in.
But verbal comments are
Sure.
going to be considered as a part of it?
Sure.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, we'll try to summarize. I think that really boils down to one big issue that kind of Bud led off the meeting with after Paul's presentation. So I think I get it. I think we all get it. So. And you chimed in a couple of ideas as well, as did David. Okay. It is, well, it's already 3 o'clock. I was going to say let's take a break, but we're going to have to, in the interest of getting through the next presentation, I want to make sure we allow ourselves enough time. If you do need to take a break and use the restroom, we'll just exit out the room, and we'll just keep going. You can be back here in a few minutes, and but we'll try and transition right now in the next few minutes to the next presentation. Thank you all for being a part of this workshop. We'll start up in a couple minutes when we get that. Is that already loaded up there? No? Okay, we'll give it a couple minutes.